and try and get this council's business done since we're quorate. Do I have apologies other than from councillors Machini and councillors Machini, Murphy and Whelan are definitely stuck in traffic and apologise for lateness.
And we have apologies from Councillor Dupre, I believe, and also from Councillor Ambrose Smith, and Councillor Criswell is substituting.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting, although please could everyone turn their mobile phones to silent. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording of the meeting will be available on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test for today, so if the alarm sounds at any other point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs and out of the main building to the muster point, which is at the far end of the building. We've done apologies. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? If any member wishes to declare an interest during the course of the meeting, please feel free to say so at any point. Item 2 is the minutes. We are asked to approve the minutes of the Strategy and Resources meeting on the 30th of January as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? I see no hands, so I will approve those minutes as an accurate record, and we will take that as carried unanimously. Item 3 is petitions and public questions. We have received no petitions or... I will refer to the committee manager on this item. Michelle.
Sorry, Chair, I think we need to just touch on the action log.
Oh, sorry, the action. The updated action log is also included with the public papers. Most of the actions are complete with an explanation against the 3 which are ongoing. Are there any comments on the action log? Good. We will now move to petitions and public questions, and I believe we have received no petitions or public questions. Thank you, Michelle. Item 4 is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report for the period ending the 31st of January. So if the Service Director for Finance and Procurement could introduce the report. Thank you, Tom. And also thank you for being here on time.
Thank you. Yes, I've had a good tour around the county this morning on my way here. But good morning, committee. This is the report on the financial position after 10 months of the financial year. In terms of the general fund revenue forecast, the position is now a 1.8 million forecast overspend. This is a 2 million improvement from the position previously reported to committee at its last meeting. The committee will be familiar with the pressures on renewables income and in children's services in particular on the cost of care placements and staffing and workforce. We're reporting an underspend in adults, health and commissioning, and that predominantly reflects the utilisation of grant income, some of which was announced during the year or after last year's settlement. And the issue, of course, with some of that grant income is that it's one-off in nature and to some extent masks the underlying pressures and position that we are currently facing. The improved position also it reflects the cross-council approach to financial control and budget management during the year, which has seen all teams tasked with reducing non-essential spend and additional controls around recruitment to posts and agency workers. Continuing with revenue, but into the ring-fenced high needs block of the dedicated schools grant. In this area, we've seen a £1.2 million increase in pressure since the last committee. The overspend in that area now stands at 12 million this financial year, which is 8 million off track from the agreed safety valve agreement with DfE. And DfE have informed us that the public record of that plan has been annotated to reflect the latest position. The council has a number of work strands in place to bring the safety valve programme on track, including review by the new leadership in the Education Directorate and additional work around the data quality in that area. Next, just dealing with the capital position, which is summarised on page 38. There is a £10.2 million underspend, predominantly due to slippage on the in-year position, and an £8 million total all years underspend across the programme. And staying with capital then, to pick up the recommendations. So recommendations D and E relate to capital. D is the costs of construction, access and conditions associated with delivery of the North Angle solar farm connection to the grid. This is a project in progress where the council has expectations about future income generation, and successful connection is vital. Progress is being made with that project, but the additional prudential borrowing is requested here and was supported by EGI at its most recent meeting. And then recommendation E is relates to the Communities Capital Fund, where recommencement of a project with earlier approval requires us to revisit the capital financing of that project, and the recommendation enables us to revive the full budget position as it was prior to the setting of the budget in February. And then just with the other kind of substantive recommendations on page 19 and 20, recommendation B relates to the waste management reform programme. We envisaged when setting the budget that additional revenue funds would be needed to enable that work during the year. Some further details are now provided on that in the report, and anticipates that 0.76 million will need to be drawn down in the first half of this year, and then asks the committee to delegate to the EGI committee the detail of that in a meeting coming up in April. And recommendation C reflects the announcement after the council set its own budget by the Chancellor of the Exchequer nationally of the extension in the Household Support Fund. We anticipate this will equate to a 3.5 million additional grant income for Cambridgeshire, and the report steps through that this will enable us to continue the existing arrangements for holiday-free school meals for a further 6 months, as well as the support and advice team and support to individuals under this scheme through other agencies in Cambridgeshire. So that's the report and the recommendations before the committee today.
Thank you very much, Tom. There's quite a lot in there. Questions? I've got Graham first.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask about the Household Support Fund? Whilst this money is welcome, it's come extremely late after we have set our budget, and it's only for 6 months. So what's going to happen after 6 months? So the government going to announce more money? I don't think we know. So I think the assumption will be that we will try and fund this really useful work from our own coffers. But could somebody just clarify what the position will be, please? Thank you.
I think it might be quite difficult for any of us to clarify what the position in 6 months might be. I don't know which of the officers. Sue's going to pick that up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've got no information that would suggest that government is going to fund beyond this initial 6 months. But obviously, in the business planning, we'd already made a commitment when the budget was approved at full council to fund the holiday food vouchers during the school holidays, and so there is already budget to actually address that. And also in COSMIC, in the meeting that took place last week, we made a commitment to allocate some of the 2.2 million anti-poverty budget that was also allocated through business planning to enable us to commission give a grant to the Citizens Advice Bureau for their income maximisation work to support residents, so that there's a continuity of support to residents around how to make the most of benefits available to them, and also to top up a scheme called the Local Assistance Scheme, which provides particularly white goods and other physical items when people are struggling in terms of meeting their household bills. So we do have provision already through our budget as a result of the business planning, but we want to make full use of the government's grant to us for the Household Support Fund for the first 6 months of this year. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to Sue's comments, which are really helpful, our understanding, if members may recall, was that any proposed extension to the Household Support Fund, the Minister for Local Government had previously advised in an informal setting rather than a formal one, the government may consider a tapering off or tail being applied to the Household Support Fund. As far as we can tell, this 6-month extension is effectively that tail or tapering effect. So at the end of the 6 months, we anticipate the national monies would come to a conclusion. We also have to consider if there are any new provisions of grant applied to the Household Support Fund. I think we're still, from memory, awaiting the detailed terms and conditions to come through. So it may be there are further provisions applied by government to the extension of the funding. So we await that detail, but it would appear that this 6-month extension is in line with the informal advice from the Minister for Local Government, and this constitutes the final tail on the fund from national support. Thank you.
Steve, and then Mark.
Thank you, Chair. On this point first, what a shame that we didn't take advantage of the informal advice given to this council through that session, not individually, but nationally, Michael Gove and his department, that there would be tailoring off of the Household Support Fund. Because if you remember the budget setting process in February, the Conservative Party put forward an amendment where we relied on 50% of the school holiday vouchers, which was 1.5 million coming from government, and we were told that was far too risky, and actually 3.5 million pounds has come in, and this was voted down by the Liberal Democrats, Labour and independent groups. So when you say that we're using our money now to fill in the rest of the form, actually it's the money that you raised on tax at that point in time. So it's Cambridgeshire residents' money that you're spending to make up the shortfall that now doesn't exist, that we advised about at the time. Going on to some other areas and questions. In the introduction, we heard about the safety valve deal, and to put it basically, £8 million off track. You know, the wheels have come off the wagon. That was a budget that this administration agreed with DfE earlier in the year, and it's already £8 million off track. We raised this at the last R&P meeting, and we were clearly children's meeting. We were told clearly that this was due to the fact that DfD, largely done because DfD had not accomplished their part of the deal. I've looked into this a bit more offline with officers, and whilst the Department for Education part of that deal is off track, it is at the thin end of the wedge as to the impact on the Cambridgeshire residents, and the thick end of the wedge is due to this administration's failure to adhere to its end of the deal. So it's no wonder that we're being put into special measures, basically, is the only way to put it. As a suggestion, it would make sense to me, as this is basically a savings plan, to introduce this into the savings tracker so we can keep an eye on and highlight position. And I also ask that we actually get a briefing note as to what is going on to change this situation, because a verbal update that some new measures being introduced when it's £8 million adrift really isn't sufficient. So I'd like a much more in-depth response on that one, if that could be circulated, please. In other areas, if I may, the capital requirement request for £1.8 million for North Angle Solar Farm, it must be a year ago now when we drew attention to the fact that so many of the solar schemes and so many of the energy schemes have gone off track and come back with repeated requests for extra finance. We were told at the time that an in-depth analysis, a deep dive, sorry, that was the word, a deep dive would be going on as to what is going wrong and how to put that right. I was wondering if we could have some information circulated by email again into this deep dive, because all that happens is we're asked to sign off more and more and more money, and there doesn't seem to be a linking program as to what's going wrong and why it's going wrong. There is an element of were the predictions right, And I think politically that would be very useful for the current administration and perhaps expedient to throw it into the last administration. There is also elements such as what happened with COVID, post-COVID, worldwide inflation. But unless we have an in-depth analysis of what is and isn't going right, we really can't just keep on signing off more and more money. So I think there's a couple of requests in there and a couple of comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do any of the officers want to come back on the questions or comments before I go to Mark? Michael, thank you.
Chair, through you, if I just come back on the DSG deficit and the safety valve position. It's enhanced monitoring that the DFE have put in place. Our understanding, and we can't confirm this was just through a meeting with through the local government association, because DFE don't publish this. So we had most of the local authorities, there are 38 that are within the safety valve. As at the current date, I think there are 3 or 4 more that are due to be added. Of the 38, I think 12 are in enhanced monitoring positions. So that is about a third of local authorities. Main issues relating to both increasing demand, inflation, but also as Cambridgeshire has got some of the issues such as the additional sites and capacities. So we're going to be working with that group in particular, and are looking to reset the position with DFE. That's something that we've agreed with them, and we'll be reporting back through. Our intention is to report back through the IFMR in terms of progress relating to that. Final point, I would just note though that the position was identified in the the end of January's SR&P committee, when I flagged this in the section 151 assessment of reserves and the need for additional reserves potentially as a result of this process.
Thank you. Just to add to that, I imagine that the in-depth reporting on that is going to the CYP committee.
I'll have to check, Chair, whether there has been in-depth reporting. I can't recall off the top of my head what's actually gone.
Okay, if we could get some feedback on that, that would be helpful. Thank you. I was just wondering whether there was other feedback on the point that you raised about the solar farm before you come back, which I think my understanding is that had a fairly thorough examination at the ENGI committee. Lorna isn't here, obviously, but Michael. And therefore, I thought that work had been done and had been fed back and supported through the ENGI process.
Chair, that is my understanding, and I think that was the January committee, but I'd have to check. But we could certainly circulate that and other briefing notes that have been made available to that committee.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't recall any briefings on the in-depth CYP or on the in-depth energy projects. If they have gone to committee, if those reports could be circulated, please. And if they haven't, I'm hoping for your approval that we will get them then. And then there was the third request. Is it should we be tracking the safety valve agreement through our savings tracker? Because that's basically what it is.
So it was certainly my understanding that there had been a report on the energy schemes to ENGI, and I'm perfectly happy for that to be circulated. If there hasn't been reporting to the CYP committee on the details of safety valve, we will certainly get a briefing to everybody on it, because I would like to see that too. But in terms of it being tracked through the tracker, I think that I'm quite happy to look at that, but I do think it's a programme that should sit under CYP, and I don't want to be usurping their role, although I absolutely recognise that the scale of this for the council is significant, and therefore it will need to be kept an eye on through this process and this committee as well. I hope that's helpful. Mark.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Chair. And through you, 4.5 on the North Angle Solar Farm. I visited the site last week, and we have 3 entities down there, which is the North Angle Solar Farm is by far the largest, and it's served by an access road, which also serves a South Angle Farm, which is like a petting zoo, educational area, and it also serves a riding stables, which are both council farms owned. Access to these 3 sites is dire. It's been mashed up on an old concrete road by the access to the North Angle Solar Farm, and it's been recognised and agreed that that's going to be repaired. The 1.8 million, can you confirm, please, that includes the money for the repairs to the road? And secondly, I'm told by the Farms Department that that's scheduled for the new financial year. And I'm thinking, like, why are we waiting? I don't understand that, because we're actually inhibiting businesses on our farms accounts from people aren't going down there because of the state of the road that's caused by one of our own projects.
Tom.
So we can confirm that the funds for the repair of the road were included by full council in the budget it voted through in February. There's no kind of time restriction, either kind of forwards or backwards, on when they would be available. So I can only imagine that the phasing of those works is to do with either availability of contractors or wanting to ensure construction works have completely finished before repair commences. My understanding is this 1.8 million extra on top of the budget voted in February relates to works on the private wire that stretches from North Angle to the grid.
If I could come back, that was in fact my question, which is, you know, are we sure that this 1.8 doesn't include the road, and the road is a separate figure? And you're very confident of that, Tom?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you. Very helpful. Any further, Steve?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is quite, it's just a technical one, and it's to help mine and everybody else's understanding. On page 81, on page 81, there is a upper limit of fixed interest rates based on net debt, and it's got the stars next to it. So there's an explanation underneath, and the measure is 150%, and it goes underneath to explain how it can be more than 100%. I literally cannot understand how it can be more than 100%. That's not a complaint. It's just, I don't understand it, and the explanation doesn't get me there. Is it possible to either try and get that through to me, my thick skull, in this meeting, or circulate something so I can understand it? It's not wrong. I've seen this before, but I just can't get my head around it. So I'm happy either to have that answered here, or if it's quite complicated, to have that answered through a briefing.
We will answer that in writing if that's okay with the committee. Thank you.
As usual, can you make sure you circulate it to the whole committee, not just Steve? Thank you. Richard.
It's a comment rather than a question, but just in relation to what Tom said about the underspend on adults and health, I just want to share with colleagues here, this is a source of concern. As Thomas said, some of it is to do with very late information about grant, and we're all aware of the difficulties of managing that, but some of it is to do with very high levels of vacancies, so higher than the targets that are there. And it is of concern, I think, to all parties in the Adults and Health Committee that potentially has a very negative effect on the service. Now, we know that efforts corporately are going on trying to boost our recruitment, and so I say this partly to strengthen and underline members' support for those efforts at a corporate level, but I also want to share that we've asked the Executive Director of Adult Social Care and Commissioning to further report back on this, because it does seem that there's a particular problem in adults and health. I don't think there's anything that Tom can add today on that, but I wanted just to share that member's concern so it's heard at this committee.
Thank you very much, Richard. I don't see any of the officers wanting to respond particularly, but I do think it's really important that we understand that that's the cause of that, and that is definitely something that is a worry for this council, and something that we should be concerned about. We are, I think, about to come onto our risk register, so we can perhaps discuss it a bit further there. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think Councillor Howitt's comments are helpful in the sense of the pressures on adults' health and commissioning. I think it would be perhaps useful to clarify that that's not a universal vacancy issue within the Directorate. For example, talking with the Executive Director within the last few days, I understand that our re-ablement teams are currently oversubscribed in terms of applicants versus vacancies, in part because of the recent success of the team in the Employee Spotlight Awards for Team of the Year. That has helped increase the number of applicants coming forward and has certainly raised the profile of the re-ablement team. So we're actually oversubscribed in that area. My assertion, and that's something the Executive Director will no doubt be picking up with Adults and Health Committee more broadly, is that this will relate to qualified adult social workers, as is generally the national shortfall area. But I thought it was helpful to just clarify it's not a universal vacancy problem within adults. There are pronounced areas such as qualified social workers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's both helpful and unhelpful, in that I think that it's important to understand where the issues in terms of vacancies are. Actually, recruiting more adult social workers is not going to be something we can probably fix as quickly as some other areas. So in that sense, a greater concern. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you're aware, many occasions we've drawn attention to the actual vacancies across many directorates. And it's been very disappointing. Often we're told that the benchmarking nationally, there's a shortage nationally. And this was particularly pronounced in highways and transport, where there's almost laissez-faire attitude to we're short-staffed, but so is everybody else, therefore that's okay, seemed to be what was coming across from the joint administration. I'm very reassured by the fact that we have at least one team, the re-ablement team, now fully staffed up, in fact, oversubscribed, and that's good. We noticed and applauded the work that went on in the Children's Committee because of their serious shortages, the actual efforts that he went into in developing a strategy to deal with that. Although it was slower than we would have liked, we hadn't seen the same level of attention given elsewhere. However, what we have got now is Oflog, the national body that actually records comparison data for various authorities. And I've brought it to the attention of the various officers that in Oflog, the turnover in adult social care in Cambridgeshire, we are an outlier. We are high, much higher than elsewhere. I'm not saying that in every single other council, but we are certainly an outlier. And this should help form part of our efforts in developing a strategy that does try and deal with these matters. I do think if we are going to start saying, if the administration is going to start saying that there are national shortages, there should be the data to back that up and to show that we're not an outlier, whereas in this case we are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Again, I don't think we need to respond on that now because I think that there will be stuff coming up later in the agenda around I don't need an officer response on it. I am actually going to respond, but I think that there are things coming up later on the benchmarking point. I do want to pick up the comment that you made about there being any sense that vacancies anywhere in the organisation are okay. I don't think that there is any sense from anyone in the joint administration that the scale of vacancies is okay. It is not okay, and we are doing what we can to tackle it across the board. Clearly, there are some areas where it is more difficult or less difficult to do that at particular times, but we are not in any way complacent about the sense of vacancies in any department in the council. I don't see any other hands, so I'm just going to make a couple of comments kind of on the broad picture of the changes that are being asked for before we move to the vote. They fall into two broad categories. There's one category of changes to our budget, which are very substantially as a result of extraordinarily late grants coming in from government, which makes budgeting extremely difficult. This is something which local government have been complaining to national government about for many years, and it is deeply frustrating to see it continuing in the way that it has done. There are some areas that it's got slightly better, but this household support fund one has been an absolute mess this winter, I have to say. It is very good to receive the money, but it would have been even more helpful had it been clear that that was coming in the autumn statement rather than in the spring budget. The other one, I think, is the fairly consistent pattern of some of our investment projects of over estimation of the rates at which income would come in. And that's something that is the case for North Angle Solar Farm, but it was also discussed at some length at the Assets and Procurement Committee earlier in last week now, isn't it? Getting my weekends in a muddle. And that is a problem for the council, that there have been consistently somewhat over optimistic expectations about the timing with which income would come in. So that's something that I hope will gradually not be the case in the future. But when we're talking about risk and wanting to be mindful about the reserves that are required for the council, I think it's something that we need to bear in mind. We will now move to the votes on the recommendations. I haven't heard anybody speak against them. So unless anybody wants to raise their hand now against the recommendations, I would like to take those as unanimous. Is that okay? Good. We can take those as unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you, Tom, for a lengthy report. There's a lot of changes in there, unfortunately. Okay, we move on to item 5, which is the corporate risk register. And we will move to Mairead, the head of internal audit and risk management, to introduce the report. Welcome, Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. So in front of you, we have our regular update on the Council's corporate risk register and on risk management activity more generally. The updated corporate risk register is presented at Appendix 1 to this report. All corporate risks have been reviewed and updated by their risk owners during February. Just to highlight that within the risk register, we have a visualization of the score for each individual risk in the top left-hand corner. The X in the table shows the actual residual risk score, while the letters RA shows the council's maximum risk appetite, which is 15. We've had one query regarding the presentation of risk 8, that is the risk that the council is a victim of cybercrime. In the instance of risk 8, the residual risk score of 15 is calculated as a likelihood of 5 and an impact of 3. That is because in the case of cybercrime, it is highly likely that the council will be a target for cybercrime, but the focus of the IT service is on reducing the possible impact when cybercrime is attempted against the council, for instance, by ensuring that staff can identify phishing emails which they may receive and know not to respond to them. So this score of 15 is within the council's risk appetite of 15. However, as standard, we show the risk appetite as an impact of 5 and a likelihood of 3, which means it is shown in the right-hand side of the table. So the risk score and the risk appetite are shown in different boxes, but the score is within the risk appetite. So apologies if that's slightly visually confusing. In the main report, Table 1 gives a high-level overview of the corporate risks, and you'll see that all of the residual risk scores have remained static since our previous update in October. As requested, we're now using a red, amber, green system to show the direction of travel for each risk, and amber denotes no change in the score. We've also brought some other updates on risk management activity, particularly the work of the CLT Risk and Assurance Group, which met on the 1st of March. In particular, this involved reviewing the way that directorate risk registers are reported to committee. So we've developed some new proposals around this, which are set out for you at section 4.1.2, as well as a further review of risk matrices. We've also brought you update on the implementation of key actions within our corporate risk strategy, which you'll find at section 5.1. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mairead. Very helpful. I suspect there will be questions. I had a feeling that Councillor Bowden would be first. I know that Councillor Dupre will be sad not to be here as well. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. I look at, I'm pleased that that risk 8 was highlighted, the risk of cybercrime, because I'm very concerned that the consequences are being understated here, or the potential consequences. Cybercrime isn't just about ransomware. It's also about the danger of deliberate denial of service, whether from malign people in this country or, more likely, malign state actors in the rest of the world. And I'll name some: China, North Korea, Iran, Russia. And this is recognized as being a serious and significant problem for everyone in the world. But in this country in particular, local government has been singled out by central government as having a particular risk because we are so disjointed, we're so individual authorities, that there are potential weaknesses which can be found. And just to give an example, fairly recently, we had the case of Gloucester City Council, where virtually the entire city's residents' names, addresses, bank details, and so on were obtained by a Russian hacker. And forgetting about the ICO and their potential penalties, but the reputational damage done to the council was enormous. But it can be worse for us because we depend so much on our IT systems for all the work which is done, including some really critical work where we have individuals who are potentially at risk. So the consequences of things going wrong as a result of a deliberate attack by someone are, in my opinion, more significant than than the number 3 would justify in this case. But looking at the detail of this, I think it's a really helpful report. It might actually be too helpful in a way. I wouldn't want anything more than this to ever to be published. And this is one of the rare areas where you do not want to have too much transparency. We've got the transparency we've got here, so I'm not giving anything away by talking about what's in here. But what is in here does worry me significantly. We've got a fair number of items under controls and about action plans. And on the controls, starting off with Control 5 about Cyber Griffin, it's something I've got some considerable knowledge of because I'm really disappointed to see the poor completion level that we've got on that as far as our training is concerned. Now, Cyber Griffin is provided by the City of London Police, which is controlled by the City of London Corporation, and I serve on the Audit and Risk Management Committee on the City of London Corporation, so I've looked at this in some considerable detail. And to see this poor level of completion of work really does concern me in terms of the resilience of our systems, particularly to do with staff training. And this is exemplified in Control 1. In Control 1, we're told that there was an exercise done, a simulated phishing exercise, which we did ourselves, where we sent out almost 8,000 emails to our own staff, people who are on our system, trying to obtain their details. And astonishingly, 178 users of our system gave their passwords or credentials. Now, that's an astonishing figure. We're told that selected training was given after that, but that was back in May 2022. I'd have thought that we should have redone that exercise by now to see if lessons have been learned and if there are still potential dangers there of individuals falling for phishing attacks. If 178 users failed 2 years ago, I bet if we did that exercise again, there'd be a fair number who'd fail again. And phishing is a prime method by which outside influencers manage to get data which they need in order to infiltrate and harm our systems. You look at Control 3, disaster recovery training. The last full disaster recovery test was done in November 2021. It really should be more frequent than that. And I know there are systems changes taking place all of the time, but you can't use as an excuse, oh, the system will be changing in 6 months, so it's pointless doing that DRT now. You've got to have more frequent full disaster recovery training than once every 2, 3, or 4 years. And look at Control 15. We've got we're told there are no assurances at present on performance monitoring for corporate IT KPIs on IT security, and that can hardly be good. And then when we look at the action plans, and this is where my first set of actual questions are, if I may, Lucy. If we look at the action plans, there are a whole host of items there. There are 5 of them where we are told a completion date of either the 30th of March or the 31st of March, just in a few days' time. And I would ask Michael, if I may, Lucy, through you, how are we doing with the business continuity plan for IT services? Is that going to be completed by the 30th of March, as we're told here? How are we doing with the corporate security KPIs? Again, 30th of March. The DPIAs. But one thing, when producing reports like this, it really is helpful not to use IT jargon. So DPIA is a data protection impact assessment. But when will we make sure that the DPIAs are completed for all systems? Again, we're told 31st of March for that. We're reviewing our partnership arrangements. Again, 31st of March is meant for that. And that's particularly important when we're talking about embedding cyber resilience for things like the cyber security of local government supply chains, which is a recognized point of weakness in local government. And then we have the partnership directory, we're told, which will also be completed on 31st of March 24. So my first question, if I may through you to Michael, because he's the overall risk holder, is how are we doing with those 5 targets, all of which are 30th or 31st of March this year? And my second question, which is to you and others, would it, given the weaknesses that there are and the danger that there is of things going wrong and what the consequences are, would it be helpful for this to be referred to the Audit and Accounts Committee so that even with further information which might end up being exempt, it's possible for a deeper dive to be done on this, given that this is not the forum in which to conduct such an inquiry, but we as councillors do have a responsibility here, and this function needs to be fulfilled largely out of the public gaze because of the sensitivity of the data. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I'll go to Michael first and then possibly pick up the second point. Michael.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair, in response to those. In terms of the actions there, I can say that they're all completed or near completed in line with the timetable. I'm not sure yet whether we've got 100% compliance on the partners, and I'll need to check that, but I'll provide a written response in relation to all of these. There is further information in relation to some of the disaster recovery that was undertaken. So we have actually completed a disaster recovery in the last 6 months, as well as what's written down in there, as well as further phishing tests. But I suggest a further written response into some of those questions would be helpful. The Audit and Accounts Committee has considered the internal audit reports into IT and the updates in relation to those, and some of those actions which were outstanding cover some of the issues that Councillor Bowden has just raised, and therefore off the top of my head I would have to go back to the internal audit follow-up position, but that is and what is currently being reported through the audit committee. Unfortunately, I just don't have Thursday's papers to hand in detail.
Thank you. Are you content with that response so far, Chris?
Lucy, I dare not ask too many more detailed questions because we're getting into areas. I don't want anything to be said which is beyond what has already been revealed. I think we've already revealed more than I would like in this report, to be perfectly honest. But I reiterate, it's a really serious matter, and I think it would be quite appropriate for us to ask the Audit and Accounts Committee to look at this without revealing any further information, but using exempt information and in exempt session to give the council and councillors greater assurance that we are on top of all of the detail of the vulnerabilities that we know that we have.
Thank you. So I think that point was the one that I was going to pick up on. I'm not sure whether that. I think what's needed is a private briefing. In this case, not an online one. So whether that sits with audit and accounts or as a private session for this committee at its next meeting, I think having an in-private briefing to councillors on the work that's being done in this field would be very appropriate. I'm relaxed about whether it sits under audit and accounts or under this meeting. So Michael.
Chair, one of the tasks that I've got is to update the training plan for the committee, for audit and accounts committee for its meeting after this, but quite happy to add that onto the list and throw it wide as an all member briefing. We did actually carry out an all members cybersecurity briefing probably about 3 or 4 months ago. So happy to refresh that and do that again, and grateful for the interest that's shown, and it would be good to get as many members there. And there are further initiatives planned that we could talk about there as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. From that, it sounds as if it might end up under the audit and accounts committee rather than this committee. I'm not quite, in a sense, I think maybe it does sit under the responsibility of this committee, but if it's all right with you, Chris, we will go away and look at the agendas for both committees and see where it fits best. And I think probably the crucial thing about it is that it needs to be programmed to be either at the beginning or the end of one of those 2 committee meetings, and other people can be invited, but it needs to be in person, not online. So we will take that away, and it will either be added to this committee's plan or the audit and governance committee's plan. Peter. Oh, sorry, I've got Peter and then you, Graham, obviously.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I don't want to comment whether it should be Audit and Accounts Committee. I mean, I think Chris is right that it's right up there in terms of risk. We had a very detailed session, a private session for the Pension Fund Committee, because as you can imagine, that is top of the tree in terms of phishing attacks. So to some extent, we've addressed there, but you know, it doesn't do any harm to broaden awareness.
Thank you, Graham.
I was going to agree with Peter. Internal Audit have completed their review of the IT systems. There was one item which was outstanding, which has now been finished. And so as far as I think we're concerned on audit accounts, that element has been done. But cyber crime is a big issue, and it could either be audit and accounts or this committee, whichever is determined most appropriate.
I think having listened to that, my instinct is to ask that it gets added to our agenda plan rather than the audit and accounts one, and we'll add it to the end of this meeting
And
at the
would it
next
be
one.
possible to invite audits and accounts members
Yes.
if they want to come?
Well, I mean, I think it would be possible to invite any member of the council to attend if they wish to. They're all entitled to attend any meeting that they would like. But I suspect that it is the responsibility of this committee to manage the risk register, and therefore it can come here. So unless I see any objection to that, I'll ask Michelle to add that to our agenda for next time. Stephen.
Clearly not an objection, Chair. Just to clarify, in terms of the terms of reference for this committee, the IT and digital strategy and the services under that remit are part of this committee's overall responsibility, in addition to which you may recall, I think it was probably last year, committee was actually responsible for ratifying the council's refreshed IT and digital strategy, which included an underpinning element for cyber security. It would therefore seem appropriate that not only you got the operational update that Councillor Bowden's been discussing, which is really important, but general progress update against the cyber security aspects you approved last year. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, that sounds like a good way forward on that. Thank you very much for raising it, Chris. It's really helpful. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. New subject. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for the improvements to the way the risks registers come across. I like the fact that the risk appetite and the actual scoring matrix are separated, because risk appetite is different for different things, and that hasn't come across clearly before. It's simply been read. I've got a suggested improvement that I hope you will take on board, Chair. That's the first one. Then I have some commentary on potential improvements that you may or may not take. And then I've got a third lot on actually understanding what we want, what we need, and where it sits. So the first one, a very simple suggested improvement, and I'll have to see how this goes down, is on page, what page, where's the page number? It's on the first table, it's page 108, and it's the table that defines direction of travel. All of these are amber, which indicates quite clearly that the direction of travel is secure. So what we've done here is we've agreed that if a risk goes up, it's a red. If it stays the same, it's amber. If it goes down, it's green. My simple suggestion is that we should change that one for red to if it goes up or the risk is in red. And the reason for that is we'll lose focus. If we see, for example, the risk of climate change, number 12, it's 16, it's in red, all right? There's been no direction of travel change, so the table as it reads is absolutely correct. It's amber, but it means we don't focus on it, whereas anything in red, inherently, we should have our eyes drawn to. So it's a simple suggestion. I hope that's able to be taken on board. The follow-ups are to do with the risk of climate change. Now, if we look at the actual risk, which is on the in-depth analysis of the risk, on 12, it says climate change, and this is corporate responsibility to climate change. Now, there are two elements of council responsibility in terms of climate change. Do we deliver on our end of the bargain? That's the first one, our buildings, our purchasing of electricity, etc. That's the first element. The second element is, do sufficiently other people, governments, small stakeholders, etc., deliver on theirs? And the strategy that this administration adopted is heavily reliant on the second part, and nothing wrong with that, but they are very, very separate things, the bits we control and the bits we don't control. So I'd like to ask, the first question is, the bits that we control, is that recognised as a separate risk in the E&GI risk register, as opposed to an overall risk for delivering on climate change, which includes people outside the organisation? The second part of the sort of really commentary on this is this, it's got a simple title, Risk Climate Change. And when I look at it, it seems to me to be focused about the delivery of carbon reductions and what happens if we don't deliver carbon reductions and how we're going to go about that. And there's some biodiversity in there. It doesn't pick up on I don't feel it picks up on some of the risks of climate change should it occur. So flooding would be the one that pops into my head. So are we fully encompassing what we mean here, or do we need a title change to talk about our commitment to delivering against the carbon reduction programme and biodiversity, or is it actually what are the impacts of climate change on this organisation and what can we do about it? So a few points there, all on the same subject. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mairead, if you could pick some of those up, but I was also going to ask some questions about about risk 12 on climate change, so we'll come back to those. But Mairead, if you could pick those up, that would be great.
Thank you. So perhaps the first thing, just to make this committee aware, is that I have had confirmation from the Place and Sustainability Directorate that they are going to be undertaking kind of a wholesale review of Risk 12. That's going to be taken to the CLT Risk and Assurance Group in June. It may be going somewhere in May that I've forgotten, so apologies. And then it would come on to this committee following that. So any comments that you make regarding that risk, we can feed back to the Directorate as they complete their review of that risk. With regards to the contents of the risk register that's been shown to the EGI committee, so within the risk register, which is held by that committee, there are separate risks which focus specifically on non-delivery of the climate change and environment programme itself. So that sort of internally held risk within the council is recognised as a specific separate risk to the wider corporate risk of climate change. So that is reflected there. And apologies, I feel that there was another point that I've forgotten.
Hopefully the easiest one of the three. The first one was the direction of travel. Would it be useful to change the labelling on the red to include anything that's still in red, regardless of which direction it's gone?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a very sensible suggestion and we'll make that change for the next report. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to Graham. Is this also on climate on risk 12 or is it on something separate?
Well, it relates to the direction of travel presentation, and Stephen's got some suggestions and I've got some slightly different suggestions, but do you want to do your
Can I just deal with the
your
risk
climate change
12 one
first?
and then I'll come to you. I had also got some questions, which many of which have helpfully been asked by Steve, so that's great. On risk 12, which I think can include a very large kind of bundle of significant risks for the council. I'm wondering whether possibly at the same time that we have a briefing on the cyber risk, it might also be useful for us to get a slightly more in-depth briefing on risk 12, which obviously substantially sits with ENGI, but I do think it would be useful for this committee to have an update on the work that's been done. So if the committee would be happy to add that to our agenda, I think our next meeting is after that will have been reported to CLT. So if we can include that, that would be great, because I do think it would be useful to have some more detail on how those different elements on climate risk get split out, because there are clearly quite different things there. Steve, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, it seems like a good way forward. I'm just thinking about the sequence of events. So you said you've got a bundle of comments, either to air now or to send them by email so that CLT can consider them as they put forward this new 12. This risk sits with us, not ENGI. This is the corporate risk as opposed to the separate one that ENGI has, and it's this one that's studying whether the other element needs revision at the same time. I've no idea, but it seems to me that the sequence of events should be you sending your bundle, you've heard my comments, CLT review it, then we look at it, and then in that session we then decide whether it needs further work review, etc., whether it's fit for purpose. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Unless there are any objections, I'm happy to pick that up. So if Michelle's noted that, we can take that forward for the next one. Brilliant. Thank you. I'll tick risk 12 off the list. Graham.
Thank you, Lucy. So I've got two questions. One about page 107 and the direction of travel table, which Steve's already sort of covered. What I found confusing was the direction of travel being in amber because there was no change. And what I would have liked to have seen was the individual risk scores being in whatever color is appropriate, so that most of them would be amber apart from the climate change one, which would be red. And then the direction of travel cell would simply have an arrow, rather like the adults and health tables, about costs of care or increasing or staying the same or going down. So if it stays the same, it's a horizontal arrow. If it's increasing, it's a vertical arrow upwards. And if it's decreasing, it's a vertical arrow downwards. That, to my mind, is extremely clear and it would not be subject to confusion. And then the more significant comment is on page 118, which has a risk that the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium term corporate objectives. Now, in view of the Chancellor's announcement or lack of announcements in the recent budget, we're going to have to tighten our belts even more in the next few years and absorb demand and absorb inflation. So I would like to see the likelihood for doesn't have enough budget go from 3 to 4, which admittedly will put it into red, but it will then be the same score that climate change has. We could change it to agreed short-term corporate objectives, because I know we've got a balanced budget for this year, but for next year we've got a big gap. We're going to have to achieve all sorts of savings and probably a lot more than we're currently indicating. So that's the reason why I would like to see the likelihood score increase. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Michael in the hope that he will be able to explain to you why he thinks it doesn't need to be there, but we'll see. And then Richard, I've got you next.
I think the, the factors that we've set out within that report obviously include the assessment of reserves that was presented to Strategy and Resources. It includes the medium-term financial plan that was presented to council. And as it stands at the moment, whilst the gap is a significant number, it's one that we're seeking to address within the current budget and business planning cycle. One that's proven and tested, and one that we have started already for 25-26 and beyond. So I think in terms of the assessment of likelihood, at this moment in time, there isn't a risk around reserves, and there is a strong legacy and structure to our business and financial planning that means that whilst options could be unpalatable, they will always be opportunities to take decisions to manage our overall budget in the short and in the medium term. And I think it's those options that will come forward that will form the budget planning. So I think that's why we've assessed the likelihood as 3. If there was shift in the funding settlement review, we have an element that is provided for within the reserves. If that was to be of a magnitude that we hadn't assumed, then clearly that would at that point in time shift potentially the risk assessment. But based on the factors we know at the moment, I think 3 is the right score, but it's something obviously we need to continue to monitor.
I hope you're slightly reassured, Graham, but you don't look very reassured.
Well, Michael has just described it. We're going to have to make unpalatable decisions, which I don't think is a way forward that this council wishes to go. I think the future budget rounds are going to be even tighter than they have been in the last few years. We hear about all sorts of local authorities going bust. We're not in anywhere near the same position as many of them, but it doesn't send the right messages to central government if we keep saying, oh, we can manage. We will have to make difficult decisions, but we can manage. I think this is part of sending the message to central government that we and others don't like what's going on. And we should therefore change the likelihood score to something more significant. I'm not suggesting that we should change all the scores on all the other risk registers, risk items, because clearly that would be inappropriate. But this one, I think, is a particularly difficult one to deal with.
Michael.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It was interesting that the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities yesterday published its response to the Select Committee into the financial resilience of local authorities. I'm happy to circulate that, by the way. The responses were very much one of either we have listened and provided additional grants, and we saw the 600 million nationally coming through, or this will be determined for the next funding settlement financial review as part of the next government. I think as it stands at the moment, we have a process to address this, and whilst some of those options could, just to restate, could be unpalatable to some people, we have a duty to set a budget, and I think government do and will expect us to look at a whole range of issues, including the productivity, which is the word that's come to the forefront in the last few weeks and months, including our own production of our productivity plan by this July. I think what there is, though, is the continued scope to continue lobbying and presenting our position to government, both as a council on its own right, but also through the LGA and the CCN, to continue to reflect back to the government and a point of change to the next government what the issues are for local council. So I still think it's within our gift to set, and therefore that's why I think it's a 3 still.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Stephen, and then I've got Richard, Steve and Edna.
Thank you, Chair. I think just in terms of the comments around the financial sustainability and risk, we recognise that Michael obviously has a statutory personal role as the Section 151 officer of the authority. He set out his views over the financial sustainability of the authority in his written Section 25 report as part of the budget and business planning process this year, and that would continue to be the way in which he would give his professional and legal assessment of the authority's financial sustainability. To the broader points that Councillor Wilson has raised around local government as a sector and indeed our own needs. Michael's right about the various groups that we work with, whether it's the LGA, the County Councils Network or others. May, however, interest members to note that yesterday the government published its response to one of the select committee's review into local authorities in financial distress. In fact, the government's response to the recommendation around local authorities being given sufficient funding to maintain sustainability is quite noteworthy. The government states that they are committed to giving councils longer term certainty, and it is their intention to return to multi-year settlements in the next Parliament when circumstances allow. I probably don't need to say anything more, do I? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you to Stephen for bringing a smile to my face. Everything is after the general election, isn't it? Two substantive points. The first one, and I know that it can open up the criticism that we're being complacent, but I just want to put on record that when I look at this report and when I look at the next report on performance and the lack of the red colour, we're doing okay, right? And it's right for us as members to quiz our officers over the hard things. But it is also right to acknowledge where they're doing a good job and we're doing a good job. And I think in terms of managing the worst risks and in terms of managing the poorest challenges in terms of performance, these reports both make me feel a bit optimistic. And I know that's going to be thrown back and said that's complacency, but I think it's quite important to say because I think we're heard and seen by the public, and judgments have to be made about these things. Secondly, whether it's the debate from Councillor Bowden, the issues you raised about cybersecurity, whether it's the debate about climate change or the issues that Councillor Wilson raised about finance, I think there are two things going on there. One is the officers want us to be aware and train us a bit, and so that we can appreciate all the complexities that they're dealing with brilliantly. And that's proper, because not all of us have got the expert knowledge in all of the areas, and so it's quite proper for that. But secondly, and when I was listening to Councillor Bowden in particular, there's us quizzing them and asking them hard questions in private, which isn't best done in a huge, big meeting, actually, and which is us just keeping them on their toes. And us all recognising that on all of those issues, there's no answers, right? And it's hard, and every authority and every organisation and company is wrestling with those issues. And so part of us doing our job well is us being willing to ask some of those hard questions in private. So I would suggest, when you think about the next meeting, if we just sit around like this in a big room with microphones and formality, that probably won't enable us to do what I think Councillor Bowden was talking about, but I would actually extend to the other areas, certainly the climate change area, and that perhaps we adjourn the meeting at the end and then continue it as a development session in private, and then with a different sort of tone and atmosphere to the debate. And in the end, I think that could be helpful to our officers. I don't think that they'd be against that at all. But there's a danger if we bureaucratise it too much that we actually won't do precisely what we're talking about doing. So I make that suggestion.
Thank you. I fully agree about the need to have a different style for those sessions, which I think would be held in private, and that would be right and proper. Good. I don't think there's any need to come back on that, but thank you for those comments. No, Steve was next, I think, and then Edna.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. The first one, unfortunately, a little bit political. I don't think the corporate risk register, which is a management tool, a corporate tool for us, looking at the risk of the organisation, is the appropriate place to send messages to government. As we heard from the officers, write your letters, join in with the CNN reports, etc. There are many ways that you can make representations to government. In terms of whether it's appropriate or not to increase the risk for the non-political reasons, the medium term is the MTFS, which is 5 years, which was the budget you passed in February. And since February, you're now £2 million better off in a revenue, £3.5 million better off in grant. That's £5.5 million. So to say that the likelihood has increased means that you've passed a non-robust budget, which was signed off by the Section 151 officer as being a robust one. It was one that you voted on and said was a robust one for delivering the council's duties over the 5 years term. So it's not appropriate, I think, to simply say we're going to go to 4 that way. And I certainly wouldn't argue with CLT on this one. I think it's necessary to use this risk reporting for its job that's intended. But I'd like to move on from that and come away from the political zone to go back to helpful comments. And I'm afraid I'm going to throw a grenade into the room because it's come about from a helpful comment from Councillor Wilson on this direction of travel, which I hadn't considered before. And looking at it now, it simply doesn't work for me, full stop, this direction of travel stuff. And I'll explain why. Risk. So risk, you have, if you want everything to be green, it's possible in most cases, all right? But in doing so, you'd have to have unlimited funding. So classic example, I fell off the play equipment when I was a young child. I broke my arm. You could say to that school, right, we want to make it safe. So you say, right, it's 4 foot off the ground. People of 3'8" are allowed to, 3'10" are allowed to use it. So there's only a 2-inch drop. So the likelihood of breaking their arm is not possible. So you can get things towards a green, or you might say, let's have padding all over the floor. That will cost a few £1,000s so we can make it green. But that's actually not an acceptable level of risk. We have an acceptable level of risk identified in each and every area. So if we have something on its identified area of risk. So let's say the score we thought was the right amount of money and risk for this organisation to go to was 12, and the risk sat on 12, the actual predicted risk sat on 12, and it didn't change direction, we would go amber and be slightly worried. If it was actually on 14 and didn't change direction, it was amber, it would be amber, oh, that's okay. If it was on 10 and it was actually costing us more than the risk, or probably costing us more than the risk we're accepting, and it didn't change, it'd be amber. So it actually should be about whether the direction of travel is towards our accepted level of risk or not. That should be the red, amber, green, excluding the red comment I made earlier. So I know that's complicated and it's a bit difficult to follow, but actually it doesn't, if you think about it that way, this doesn't work. The one we've got in front of us, it simply doesn't work. If you have a risk in the wrong place, either above or below, and the direction of travel is red, amber, or green, it simply doesn't work for us. So could I ask officers to consider that and look at that through those eyes? Because, sorry, but it only occurred to me because of the helpful comments from Councillor Wilson. It doesn't work.
Thank you. I'm not going to respond to the political comments, but on the discussion about the direction of travel, I am going to suggest that we have an in-private risk session after the next strategy and resources meeting, at which we can discuss that further. And probably we shouldn't try and redesign the direction of travel on risk in this meeting. So if you're happy to take those comments away, Mairead, we will look at that again. And we can have a kind of a discussion about it in a more informal context, as suggested by Councillor Howard. Edna.
Thank you very much. I just want to return, I'll just make a couple of points briefly. One is to return to the previous comments about meeting our medium-term corporate objectives, because that is the risk that we don't meet our medium-term corporate objectives. It's not that we're not going to set a balanced budget, because we will set a balanced budget. And I think that my reading of that risk is that it's not about whether we're going to produce a balanced budget. It's about whether we are able to meet our medium-term objectives, which includes delivering the sort of services we think people deserve. So I would really like to align myself with Councillor Wilson on this, in that we just really need to be attentive to what the risk is about. It's not entirely about financial sustainability, although that is part of it, and that is not in question. But I think that the risk of not being able to, not have enough funding to deliver the sort of services that we think people should have, it is real. And I would hate to say that all we're aspiring to is to have a balanced budget, because that isn't a palatable future. So I just put that forward as a kind of potential way of aligning everyone's comments. But my question really was about risk 7, failure to deliver key council services, which I've sort of got a couple of questions about it. One is, it seems to me this is often a sort of secondary risk. It's something that can be triggered by something else crystallizing on the risk register. So I sort of question, is it a bit overcomplicated to have it on its own? Surely these things could be attached to the original crystallization risks. If you see what I mean, it's natural consequences from some of the other risks. But I also look at the vulnerability factors, and they're all external, and they're all sort of live. So I'm also slightly surprised that if we are going to have this risk as a separate risk, I'm surprised it's the score it is. I would have thought it would be a bit higher.
Does anyone go? Steve?
Chair, thank you, and thank you to Councillor Murphy for the question. Of course, I'd be delighted to see risk 7 disappear, given I'm the risk owner. No, the reality is, I think in discussion with the corporate leadership team and with advice from Mairead, this particular risk on the council's risk register is one we have struggled with over a number of years. So this is a further iteration on what we had previously. If members go back to the previous iteration of this risk, actually previously it only covered what was then people and communities in place and sustainability. It wasn't an all-encompassing risk that spoke to the council as a whole organisation. So this is a development from what we had previously, and unless I get it wrong, and Mairead will hopefully correct or advise otherwise, really we needed something else included within the risk register that, if you forgive the phrase, was a bit of a catch-all, because it was, how do you catch the things that might otherwise be missed in the risks that we've articulated elsewhere, or the things that are, they become crystallized as a result of issues that span more than one service area or one particular point. So I think that's essentially why we have this risk. I'm happy for us to revisit the scoring, as we do quarterly anyway, but I also think from experience of risk registers elsewhere, it's helpful to still have something like this incorporated. That would certainly be my advice. And then, Chair, as a further aside, just as an observation, and again, this is actually feedback for the committee from me, it's actually very helpful to have members giving this level of time, attention and scrutiny to the council's risk register. And I appreciate that you will have similar discussions in different organisations with different hats on in a number of cases around the committee. But actually, if I can compare that to some other organisations I've worked within, this level of rigour and attention does not happen in my experience. So I think that's actually a compliment from me on behalf of officers to our members. This level of scrutiny is actually very helpful, both in terms of the detail, but also in terms of the methodology. I think that actually helps in terms of our annual governance statement and our improvement plan that goes alongside that. So that's something I'll reflect on with the monitoring officer as we take that forward through audit and accounts this year. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely agree about the level of scrutiny of this register. I think it's really helpful, and the comments so far have been extremely useful from everybody. on that risk, looking at the stuff underneath it, I think it is a really useful thing. I think that the thing that might not, the headline, the title of it might need some thinking. Mark, you're next, I think.
Thank you, Lucy. Mairead, I'm going to start by saying, well done. I think this is an excellent presented, descriptive and relatively understandable report. So thank you. Thank you. Can I draw your attention to risk 10, failure of key contracts? When I was reading this, you automatically think of the contracts in adults and children and the criticality of those. But I was also, for personal reasons, drawn to the contracts that we have in the highways world. And if we look at your controls, control for business continuity planning process is rated as poor. But there's no critical success factors and there's no assurances in this one. So I went down further to look at the action plans, and there's one mention of business continuity perspective in action plan 3, and again, no assurances. Now I looked at all the other risks. There's a whole plethora of critical success factors as an assurance is given. I'm just interested as to why they're not present on the failure of key contracts, which, you know, we've got a high level of control on what we do, on what we control. We must exert as maximum a level of control on our partners and our contracted partners for what they're delivering. And as a result of that, you know, it's a single point in either direction from being in the red. And I'm just concerned that there seems to be a lack of focus on it, or a lack of detail shared on it. It may not be that the focus is missing, but we can't tell that from this. And the comments you've just heard from the chair of this committee and the leader of the and the chair of the council, sorry, not the chair, I'll get it right, the CEO, is very much along the lines of this is a really, really good and healthy debate to have. But I don't feel I can have that on risk number 10 because there's not enough information on there.
Thank you. I think that's also a well-made point and one we can pick up. I suspect that there are some elements here beyond the cyber one, which are probably better dealt with privately than publicly, but I'm not quite sure. I suspect that certainly some of our concerns about our contracts are not necessarily things we'd want to go into in enormous detail here. Stephen.
Chair, just an observation on risk 10, failure of key contracts, and thank you to Councillor Goldsack for the comments and the suggestion that this one be looked at further. Conscious Michael is the risk owner for this one, but I actually think we might want to make some greater reference to the work that's already underway through the Asset and Procurement Committee and make sure the risk is properly articulated in terms of the work that the commercial and procurement team are doing, but also making sure we have some of the more significant contract controls reflected in the appropriate way in the risk register. So I think the comments and the suggestions are very helpful. And I agree that as you aggregate up from directorates to the corporate one, it can become a little bit more vanilla and anonymized than might necessarily be helpful. So we can have a look at that. So yes, I think that's entirely helpful.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, through you, is that something that we will see either on the action tracker or?
I think we will discuss it in the workshop that we have effectively decided we're going to have. But I would also expect that the next time we see this, there'll be a bit more detail in there as long as it can be done.
Yeah, but so as far as that will be on this committee's action tracker for us to look at. It may be.
Yes.
I take Stephen's point entirely. It could be that it's AMP that it's actually discussed and gone into more detail, but I don't want to lose the action. That's all.
No, that's fine. Thank you, everyone, and particularly thank you, Mairead, for the report. I hope it is certainly my view that the length of discussion on this has been extremely helpful for the council and useful. I do want to make it clear, Mairead, that this is in the context of what we think is a very good report, and it's very helpful to have it clearly set out. It is just something that we all need to take very seriously. So thank you. I think it's for noting. So we have now noted it. And we will move on to item 6, which is the corporate performance report, which I think is Sue.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Yes, the performance report you have here is for Q3, September through to December 2023. You will note that we do not have any red indicators, and that's particularly because the percentage of subject access requests that we've completed within the statutory timescales has moved from red to amber. So I think that's good to see. We've also got some commentary on high performing indicators, and just to draw your attention to are the customer perception rating for the IT services. That's obviously within the council, so that's colleagues and members across the council, and the proportion of information inquiries resolved at the first point of contact through the contact centre, which is standing at 81%, and our target is 80%. I particularly want to draw the committee's attention to section 4, because we've got some recommendations here for changes to wordings and changes to the indicators. So firstly, for indicator 187, which previously was about the proportion of staff feeling valued, off the back of the 2023 staff survey, which was conducted for us externally by Ipsos, and part of the reason we went external and had this done independently was that we were concerned that we needed to be able to benchmark our results through this staff survey with others across the public sector. And certainly engagement and staff feeling engaged sat at the heart of that survey. And there were a number of data points or questions within the survey that related to that indicator around staff feeling engaged. So we do feel that having an indicator that is about the proportion of staff feeling engaged is a much more robust indicator. It's one that can be benchmarked in future, and I know members have had a few occasions to sort of be taken through the detail of the results of this staff survey. So we think that is a better performance indicator for future use, and to benchmark ourselves against, but also to see where we continue to sit with others across the public sector as we carry out this survey in the future. So that's the first change to an indicator. The second two changes are to the HR indicators, which are number 213 and 214 in the pack. And again, in this committee, we've had previous conversations about the need to be able to benchmark our HR indicators against others in the public sector. And work has been carried out to enable us to do that. So the first proposed change to indicator 213 is to move that indicator descriptor to average days lost to absence. This will enable us to have a national comparison, and we will be able to see our relative performance against others. As I say, something that we've been looking to achieve following feedback from this committee. Obviously, our previous indicator was looking at a specific aspect of absence around anxiety, stress and depression, and the detailed dashboard that accompanies the new indicator will still have the reasons for absence details. So members will be able to see what proportion of absence relates to those areas. But if this change will enable us to benchmark this indicator in future. And the second change to the HR indicator is number 214, and this is to change this indicator to covering all turnover, not just voluntary turnover, which will increase our current percentage to 16.6. But again, it means this indicator can be benchmarked. And so we will be doing some background work against both of these HR indicators for the report that comes to committee in July, so that we will sort of backtrack if we'd have had these indicators in place, what would that look like? So we'll be able to provide some trend information to the next committee. So today in front of you are the recommendations on those HR indicators to change them so they can be benchmarked in future. So that's all I wanted to say, and obviously the recommendations are to note the report and also to approve those recommendations set out in section 4 that I've just detailed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. I very much welcome the comments which have been made about indicator 187, about the proportion of staff feeling engaged. And I understand and appreciate the logic of saying that we cannot look at the 2021 figures and compare them with the 2023 figures because we're not comparing the same things. Fully understand that. There is one comment within indicator 187 which I'd appreciate being corrected in future versions. And that comment is that we had an overall response rate of 54% of employees, which provides for a statistically significant data set for all questions. Well, if the 54% of employees who responded were random, then yes, it would be a very statistically significant data set. But no, the 54% who responded were those who could be bothered to engage. So we're almost defining the question itself there. There were 46% who couldn't be bothered to engage with even responding to the report. So saying it's a statistically significant data set only applies to those who are engaged enough to respond. So I think that that phrase statistically significant is not technically correct and should be removed in future versions of this. But looking at that, we see that 54% responded, so 46% weren't engaged enough even to respond. And of the 54% who responded, there was an overall engagement rating of 55%, which equals an overall negative engagement rate of 45% by definition. 45% of 54% works out at 24.3%. So the total number who either not engaged enough to respond at all, or who did respond but who were deemed not to overall being engaged, comes to 70.3%, 7 out of 10 of our employees. And that's rather a significant figure. And when you're talking about problems with staff retention, if you have 7 out of 10 of your employees who either are deemed not to be engaged enough because of their responses, or who weren't even engaged enough to respond, I'd say that's a problem. And I'd say that's something which needs to be looked at. Now, I do appreciate there is a process going ahead, or ongoing at the moment, which will be reported to the Staffing and Appeals Committee sometime after April. But I'd have thought that we in this committee should be very concerned if more than 7 out of 10 of our employees appear either not to be engaged or not be engaged enough even to respond to a survey about engagement. Now, trying to be helpful here, there is data here. There's lots of useful data, I'm sure. What I would find very interesting, and what I think everyone would find very interesting, is breaking this down by directorate and knowing for each directorate what percentage bothered to respond, and of those who did respond, what percentage responded positively to be said to be engaged. I think that would be a really useful exercise because it would show very clearly, I think, where we have greater challenges in terms of engagement and therefore staff retention. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. I can't possibly respond to all your instant maths calculations, but we did take specifically back to Ipsos the point around if we got 54% response rate, then the degree of confidence we could have in that. And I can issue this to committee, but what I recall is that in terms of, obviously they're experts in this field, that if we'd have had 100% response rate, there was a plus or minus 3% degree of difference in confidence. So I can supply to committee the response we gave, that Ipsos Mori gave to us in terms of confidence factors, because obviously that was of concern to us. But notwithstanding that, because obviously we can see the proportion of staff who weren't engaged, which is why we didn't immediately off the back of the survey produce the action plan. And again, under the advice of Ipsos Mori, we then followed up the survey with a whole series of focus groups that were done. So opportunities for people to meet and discuss how they felt about working within the council and their degree of engagement with the corporate leadership team. And that was also done across each directorate so that we got a richer picture by having that face-to-face contact specifically off the back of the survey and informed by the survey results, in order that the action plan does start to pick up those who perhaps didn't complete the survey as well as those who did. So we did follow that up in order to try and address some of the points that you've raised, and also to say that we do have the data at directorate level as well. And so executive directors have been issued with the data at directorate level, and the directorate listening sessions, which is what we called our staff engagement sessions, were specifically looking at the contrasts between the different directorates and being able to have that more nuanced conversation. And each directorate is expected to have an action plan that is specific to its directorate, both off the combination of the survey results and the conversations we've had subsequently with staff. And we will have a council-wide action plan as well, which looks at the aggregated survey and the conversations that the corporate leadership team have had with staff. So this is the first time we've done this survey in this way, supported through Ipsos. We're learning by that process. We're learning from Ipsos about how to do this, and we absolutely share your concern about doing this well and effectively, and ensuring that we're hearing from the voices of all our colleagues across the council. So that's what we've done ourselves in response to some of the concerns that you've raised. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, for an extremely thorough response. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. From a pure statistical point of view, I'll be extremely interested to see how Ipsos Mori managed to justify the comment of plus or minus 3%. I think that will be that'll be a most illuminating mathematical exercise. If that could be sent to me, I'd be really grateful at my Fenland address, please, because I certainly I need to be educated about how that's even possible. So that will be very interesting. And I'm not surprised that senior management team have been professional enough to break this down by directorate and to look at this separately. Yeah, and I'm sure that it was very illuminating breaking it down by directorate. May councillors be similarly illuminated, please? And by changing this indicator so that we see it by directorate and also see the response rate by directorate, it will also provide a very useful baseline for the next time this exercise is done, because it's not the overall figure which is just important, but also the changes in individual directorates. And we don't know just what challenge there is in some areas which needs to be addressed more than others. And I think it would be really helpful if we are producing an indicator such as this to see that broken down, because my understanding is that there was quite a significant difference in the responses that we received from different directorates. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, I think you wanted to pick that.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Bowden for the questions. Couple of observations. First of all, the breakdown and presentation of this information has already been shared with cross-party members in a number of fora. However, we're very happy to do that in a broader setting. In fact, it might be, Chair, that you would want a briefing session for members of Strategy, Resources and Performance to be added to the training plan to perhaps enable discussion on that subject. Of course, oversight of this will be sustained through the Staffing and Appeals Committee as well, which is the relevant committee in terms of workforce matters, but we would be very happy to share that more broadly with Strategy, Resources and Performance. On the point about the response rate to the survey, the 54% response rate figure is significantly above that you often receive in other public sector organisations, which speaks to the confidence level that Ipsos Mori have in terms of the results being more valid. Ipsos Mori would normally use a figure of around 30% to give a sample size sufficient to draw some conclusions and have confidence in. So I think part of the commentary from Ipsos Mori around statistically significant was recognising that the response rate was well above the level at which they would anticipate being able to draw reasonable conclusions. So that's probably helpful to just point that out. In terms of the overall breakdown of the figures, those clearly are not just at directorate level, but we also own the entire data set, because whilst they facilitated that for us, we actually have the whole data set held by the council so that we can, if you forgive the phrase, Dyson slice as we would choose to. I think more broadly, what would be helpful for members to see is not just the information arising from the survey, but actually the action plans that are being developed through the listening sessions that Sue has described. We will, of course, be bringing that back through Staffing and Appeals Committee, but I think it would be useful to talk that through in the training session or the briefing session with members of this committee as well. I would also hasten to add that all members can access the results of the survey already. It's published on CamWeb and the detail is wholly accessible. It has been shared through Friday Focus, and we're very happy to recirculate that following today's meeting of SRP. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just going to make one very brief comment in response to Chris's maths, which is that I think it would be as dubious to assume that everybody who didn't respond to a survey is feeling negative as it would be to assume that everybody who didn't respond to a survey is feeling positive. So I think if we're talking about valid statistics, we just need to be, I'm not going to reopen it, Chris. It's time to move on. All right, very, very quickly, but I think you need to be really, really careful about
You are, of course, entirely correct in what you say. I fully accept that. Although in a survey about engagement, when people don't engage, one can make some assumptions in terms of direction of travel.
Wouldn't want to make that particular 100% assumption. I think it would be very questionable. Richard.
Firstly, I think we can say that a renowned polling company like Ipsos Mori understands statistics and is regularly scrutinised for their record in what they suggest. I think we can take that as rather good advice. Secondly, I didn't like the words bother to reply. I don't think that's a good thing to say about our staff. You know, they're very busy. As we've heard already from the Chief Executive, it's quite a high response rate. And I think we should be careful about our language when we have these debates, because we're sending out messages all the time to our own staff. But as the Chief Executive has indicated, I've certainly seen the breakdown, and I do apologise, but I forget exactly which forum I saw that in. But I'm really pleased that the results are fully publicly available, and I'm completely open. I think the adults and health area is an area where the engagement is lower and the response is lower, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, to show we've heard it, and then to get involved in actually looking at some of the underlying reasons. Now, most of all, it's tough out there. You know, we're understaffed and we're dealing with really serious social problems, and it's tough for our staff. You know, and that doesn't mean that we're not responsible for doing everything possible within our powers to make it as better as possible. But it's tough out there, and you would find that in other local authorities. And the only thing, Stephen's really said a lot of that I wanted to say, but when this does come back to members, it is only really interesting if what we're doing about it is the subject of discussion, not just seeing raw figures. And so it's that area that I think is it, and we should be dealing with that not just in this committee, in my view, but all the main service committees should also be doing that, and I hope we can encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. And I think there was one more comment from Steve.
Thank you, Chair. On the same subject, before moving on, I'd just like to say that I could follow Chris's maths, and as usual, it was impeccable. It was absolutely flawless maths. I do understand that there's an element of the assumption that there's based there on the lack of engagement. Now, I get where Ipsos Mori are coming from, saying that there's a plus or minus when you've got a good response rate, but when the specific question that Councillor Bowden drilled down on was engagement, and 45% roughly didn't engage, then that brings that an element of greater than plus or minus 3% on that one question, I would suggest. It doesn't give us an automatic answer, but the maths was flawless, where with that logic it took us to. I just want to talk about the usefulness and move on to a different indicator in terms of the usefulness of what we're doing. And before I go there, I just want to say well done, Sue. The red indicator on the FOI research, that's been the focus of attention. We've tried through this committee to put pressure on you. You did put forward an action plan that has delivered results. I'm glad to see it's off of the red indicator range finally. So well done on that. In terms of usefulness, I'm going to look at indicator 213, and this is 214 staff turnover. All right. Talking about engagement, which we was talking about earlier, is really useful as a tool because it helps us understand whether it's one of the things that leads to high staff turnover. If people don't feel valued or engaged, there's a greater likelihood that they will leave us. Right. So I think it's a shame that we've moved from valued to engaged, because that would have been more useful in terms of discovering whether people will leave us or not, valued as opposed to engaged. But I totally understand the rationale, because these indicators don't mean very much to us unless they have some measure of benchmarking against them. Because all we hear at committees, and we've heard it just again from Councillor Howard, is just that, you know, everybody's struggling the same. Well, you know, we need to know how much other people are struggling to come out with bland comments like that. And we know that in the adults are struggling more than the national comparators from Oflog. And we know from this indicator 2113 that this organisation is struggling more than its national comparators and its statistical neighbours, because the staff turnover is higher. I thought it was useful for the answers that we got to Councillor Bowden's comments about the fact that it's drilling down into areas of weaknesses by directorate level, or sorry, areas of response by directorate level, which then leads to an action plan. And here again with this staff turnover, what we've got in front of us is this is going to create a revised target for the indicator. And that isn't what I want. I don't want a revised target for the indicator. What I want is the action plan for how we're going to reduce staff turnover. That is the more important element to me. And I'm pretty certain that, Sue, when you come back in, you'll be saying, actually, that forms part of the action plan. But I hope you're going to say that. But that actually is more useful for us to hear than us hearing about changes to indicator. I do think that there's an element of human resources are simply not there to fire and measure. They can be the critical friend that can look over the shoulder, produce the numbers, and then have a look at the action plans for delivery, as opposed to just going back to the directorate and saying, you are poor in this area, what are you going to do about it? HR should be able to do that and make comparisons between their performance in recruitment, advertising, etc., to say, well, actually, we need to do things slightly different to get your levels up. In terms of where we are marking against statistical neighbours, 14% national, 15% statistical, 16.6% us. The one thing I wouldn't want anybody to think that I personally would be happy with would be to hit a statistical neighbour or a national average. I've always maintained that Cambridgeshire should be one of the best authorities in the country, and anything where we are average is a target for improvement. Where we are below average is an immediate area of concern. And so the level of, I don't want to accuse anyone of level of complacency. I want to instill in everybody the same desire that I and my colleagues already have, that actually hitting the norm isn't good enough. We want to be better than that. So I'll leave it to Sue, if you come back just on the action plans with regards to what we're going to do with staff turnover and targeting. Thank you.
Thank you. And obviously moving to this indicator will enable us to have greater confidence of where we sit relative to others, which is obviously the purpose of this. And as I said, we do want to take the time over the next few months to apply this new indicator and to look retrospectively. So we again have got a richer picture to be able to look at where we sit relative to others, but also within that where we've got particular issues of concern. So in terms of the action plan, then yes, and the action plan really where this will sit, it does relate obviously to the activity coming off the back of the survey, but it specifically relates to our people strategy, and the way our people strategy is already identified recruitment and retention as being very critical. We've obviously had a very keen eye focused on children's services over recent times, and we're really pleased that we're starting to see the positive results through that very focused and targeted activity in children's services, and the stability that we now have the leadership team, and we're watching very keenly the proportion of agency versus permanent staff, and Councillor Howard has also identified areas in adult services, so that detailed scrutiny is able to be done. And I think, yeah, certainly in terms of being able to monitor our progress where we have struggled to recruit or retain, or where we're an outlier relative to others, is something that we are focusing our attention on, and be very happy, I'm sure, to bring further updates back to this committee off the back of this change to this indicator. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Stephen, you also wanted to come.
Thank you, Chair. Just joining the dots on a couple of things that have come up through the committee today, particularly because we're talking about workforce turnover rates, which might be helpful to observe. I think Councillor Count referenced the Office for Local Government, otherwise known as Oflog, in contribution in one of the earlier debates, and referenced specifically workforce turnover rates. The turnover rate quoted in the performance dashboard that Sue's presented to committee today is entirely county council employees, does not look at broader workforce. The off-log figure for adult social care is the totality of the adult social care workforce in Cambridgeshire as a place. So that includes all providers, not just the county council's employed workforce. That's why there is quite a significant difference between the turnover figure that's quoted here for our direct employees versus the information that's in the public domain from Oflog that covers all adult social care providers in Cambridgeshire. Councillor Count was right to comment that Cambridgeshire for adult social care provision as a whole, not just the county council, does report a higher workforce turnover rate than some other parts of the country, and indeed compared to some similar local authorities, as Oflog sets out. But I thought it would also be helpful to just reaffirm that the Adults and Health Committee has been looking at this for some time. There was a plan approved last year by the committee around adult social care provider workforce arrangements, significant investment put in there through the Market Sustainability Investment Fund, and importantly, that's led to the development of things like our Care Academy for adult social care workforce, or actually the adult care workforce, not just social workers, which was launched at the turn of the year. So whilst it's important to recognise that the turnover figure we're discussing now is for the county council's own workforce, we aren't complacent and have been taking steps to look at how we reduce turnover in the broader markets that we commission services from as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the clarification, Stephen. I was aware that the Oflog figures included all people in adult social care, and of course, a huge amount of them are employed through third parties by the county council, and implicit through that, there's a responsibility for the county council, the type and nature of the contracts that we issue, that leads to the people being employed, and they form a large proportion, as well as our own employees, of the high staff turnover. Just in terms of where we are in the process, the Care Academy is welcome. Of course, prior to 2021, we had actually started the work on progression through care prior to 2021. And now we know that the Care Academy is coming out in 2023. This survey was done in September 2023. And for me, possibly because this administration moved to quarterly meetings from monthly, it seems like a long while to get from September 2023 to where we are today. And with monthly meetings, perhaps we could have accelerated some of this work further. But thank you for the insights and the responses, Chair.
Thank you. I disagree that we would have got to this point any further. Can I just pick up on the, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the indicator here on staff engagement, with some questions around where the figures for that have come from, and the action plan on staff turnover. So in order to respond to those, and I do think they're important questions, I wonder if we could put something on the action log, Michelle, about getting a briefing to members on those issues. On the staff turnover one in particular, I think it would be very useful to be quite clear about where we have turnover issues and what those issues are. Absolutely recognising that not all staff turnover is a bad thing. Because actually, particularly in relation to the Care Academy and to the care workforce, one of the things that is very important for that workforce is to be able to have a sense of career progression. And if you are going to have a sense of career progression, that's probably going to mean not staying in the same job forever. However, I don't think that I think we probably do want to bring the numbers down from the turnover that we've got at the moment. But I think we just need to recognise that good doesn't mean zero, and we need to have a kind of a picture of actually what we want in terms of staff turnover in different areas of the council, which I think is probably a step on from where we are now. Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I'd just like to raise a point or two on indicator 213, the full-time equivalent days lost to anxiety, mental health, depression, and stress absence. And I looked, as is often the case, you look at the pictures before you look at the words. So I looked at the graph before I looked at the narrative, and I was impressed to see on a rolling average basis the reduction during last calendar year of days lost on this indicator from 2.7 to 2.3. And that mightn't sound much when I just say it like that, but I fully understand the amount of work which must have gone in to ensure that that reduction was achieved. So I think credit needs to be given on that. What I was hoping to see on the next indicator and didn't was the wider indicator of FTA days lost to sickness in general. And I do appreciate, again, that's a difficult indicator because it can be distorted by long-term sickness as opposed to short-term sickness. And there are two very different measures which are commonly undertaken because they're two very different problems. But we don't have that data provided to us. I tried to look it up on some of the national indicators, and I just saw Cambridgeshire doesn't have that information available, or is not available to those who are doing the comparison with other county councils. It's complicated by the fact that in other county councils, some of them include schools in that indicator as well. So I'm not suggesting this is simple, straightforward, but I think it would be really helpful for us to have that overall trend and to see what is happening to overall sickness rates per full-time employee.
Sue.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. So if we change the indicator as recommended here to average days lost to absence, then beneath that we do categorise the different types of absence. So you will not only still be able to see the detail that sits underneath that related obviously to absence related to stress, anxiety, depression. You will also be able to see sickness absence related to other conditions, and obviously there are certain sort of categories that fall within that, which are the frequent reasons for we also have an understanding of a long-term and short-term sickness. So that detail is there, and actually by changing the indicator we'll be able to look at what the aggregate position in terms of days lost to absence, but also the detail underneath it around reasons for absence and duration of absence. So I'm hoping that this change of indicator will be more helpful, although I completely accept that our recent focus, particularly through COVID and post-COVID, on that particular indicator that we've had formally and all the wellbeing work we've done has been really critical to the organisation. So thank you.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. That ability to separate out between the long-term sickness and short-term sickness is absolutely vital. And if that's able to be provided as well, that is superb. May I just ask, will this indicator be provided just for our own employees, or will it include schools as is done by some other county councils?
Apologies, just ours.
Thank you. Again, I think that's been a very constructive discussion. So thank you very much to everyone. And just to finish on, you did start by saying that there are no red indicators. I do want to thank you for that, because I know that a phenomenal amount of work has gone into dealing with some of those long-term issues that we've had. So thank you very much, Sue, to you and your team for all of the work that's gone into that to get to that position. Thank you very much. We do, I think, need to vote on this because I think there are some changes. So I haven't heard anybody speak against those changes. If anybody does want to speak against those, could they indicate that now? If that's not the case, then I will assume that that's been carried unanimously. Okay, thank you very much indeed. And we have noted the report, and thank you again to Sue and your team for all the effort that went into a good report. The final item on the agenda is the committee agenda plan and training plan. I think we've added at least one thing to our agenda and training plan today, Michelle. I hope you can pick that up. Thank you.
So in relation to this report, the July meeting has an additional item of the local productivity plan to be added. Based on the discussion that we've had this morning, the request from Councillor Bowden regarding the cybersecurity, that will need to be held after the July meeting in person. In relation to the other workshops or briefings asked for, if members are happy, I think it would be a bit difficult to hold them all in one go. It's probably best to just focus on one item at the July meeting and perhaps hold the risk one before July, but perhaps hold that virtually on Teams. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm slightly wondering whether it would be useful to have the risk one around the same time as the cyber one because they relate to risk, but do people want to take them completely separately or have them? I had imagined that would be one session after our next meeting rather than two separate sessions. Chris?
Given the real seriousness with which we should be dealing with cyber, may I just ask if that is kept by itself at this stage? Because if we are to do this subject justice, it will take a bit of time and a bit of effort.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. In that case, we'll stick with Michelle's proposal. And I don't see anybody wanted to raise any other concerns. So thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you everybody to your attendance and for what I think has been a very useful discussion. And I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.